You're still watching Morning at NTV, the final band of August 2023. A hot topic for this morning in our Kickstarter is going to be looking at ensuring building fire safety and accessibility. My name is Priscilla Regina Deloge, and welcome to the discussion. Now, the backbone of it is that fire safety codes and standards of health airborne bodies are usually in use of buildings that exist in almost every country. These people can take for granted the buildings that are fire safe for them. However, guidelines concerning fire safety for people with activity limitations or fire safety for all, if those guidelines actually do exist and are adhered to, are usually technically inadequate, entirely and bluntly discriminatory. Now, these people must assume that there is a serious risk for their safety every time they enter a building. For them, this is a very significant barrier to their personal development, participation, as well as social inclusion. The National Building Review Board embarks on that concern and how they are addressing that very concern. I am joined by those that are on the review board. We do have with us Mr. Herbert Zziwa, the Communications Manager with the National Building Review Board. You're most welcome and good morning.
Good morning, Uganda.
That's the next one.
Yes.
And then we are also joined by Mr. Anthony Rucukye, who's the Manager Investigations, still with the National Building Review Board. Good morning to you, Mr. Rucukye.
Good morning, Priscilla. Good morning, Uganda.
Okay, so let's first understand fire safety codes and standards for health. What are those, and do they exist, and are they adhered to here in Uganda? Let me start with the Investigatives Manager.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. So the National Building Review Board, as an agency under the Ministry of Works and Transport, with a mandate to ensure that we promote and ensure decent, safe buildings which are in harmony with the environment, and fire safety is core to this. So the mandate drives the board to ensure that the industry has guidelines and guidance in terms of national standards and codes to ensure that this safety is achieved. And yes, they exist. We have a national building code for mechanical installations, for electrical installations, for building standards, all published in 2019, which aim at guiding industry to ensure that we have safety considerations from design stage through to construction and also the operation of these buildings. Of course, when fires happen due to arson, for example, technically there's not much you will do about arson. The police will take that up. But then from an engineering point of view or a judicial point of view, you are interested in ensuring that if a fire happens, you can suppress it. If a fire could happen, you can detect it. And if a fire also happens, you can evacuate the structure so that people are safe, they can get out of the building safely, and also that the structure remains structurally strong even after the fire incident. And the National Building Code and Standards and Building Control Regulations 2020 cover all these aspects.
Okay.
And if I may add, Priscilla, all these standards and codes are available on our website, free to download. So the industry is free to go to our website
but you see,
and pick them up.
Ugandans are in Africa, and Africa is known to, if you want to hide wisdom and knowledge from them, put it in writing. They will never desire to get to know about it, which will beg later on in our discussion, how are you helping them to actually be able to adhere and follow some of these standards? Now turning to you, Mr. Zziwa, it has been mentioned that at least from initial stages of building coming up, from design all the way to implementation, construction and completion, there must be that element of detecting. There should be an element of ensuring that if a fire does come through, then there's a suppression element and the evacuation element. As I inquire from you, do these actually exist in buildings, for example, the ones that you've had inspection of in recent times? And I would like you to also give us an assessment. When you say buildings, does this include, for example, the schools? Because we've had so many fires in schools most recently, since 2018. That number keeps growing higher and higher. So in your assessment, does your review board also consider the buildings in schools?
Yes, thank you so much, Regina. You're right, our board also considers schools. And recently we've been moving around, doing an assessment on schools and seeing how they are preparing themselves in terms of ensuring fire safety. That study has been ongoing, and it will inform a policy paper that has to be discussed by the Ministry of Education to issue guidelines to schools. And I hope next year, by beginning of next year, the schools will have guidelines on how to ensure fire safety.
Okay.
But talking about the designs, since the board came into being in 2018, we've ensured that before any building permits are issued, before any approvals, the designs must cater for, one, fire safety, and also persons living with disabilities. And how are we ensuring this? Through the building committees. So before a building committee of any city, municipality, or local authority approves any plan or gives any permission for construction, such issues must be considered. And also to note, in terms of fire, one of the officers who is supposed to be on the building committee is a police officer representing the fire department, meaning that before they approve any plans or any designs of any structure, the fire aspect must be looked into. That is one of the ways we are trying to see that we ensure fire safety and have buildings that are safe for all Ugandans. Like my colleague has said, our core responsibility as the board is to ensure safety. We're not talking about cutting costs by the developers. Ours is ensuring safety. And the only way we can ensure safety is by having all the requirements of ensuring that safety catered for during the design process. And also, implementation and supervision is very important to ensure that we have this sector that is safe for all of us. Yes.
Okay, because that begs the question of monitoring and evaluation. If this has been, something intentional since 2018, does that mean that it's only applicable to those that are wanting to construct buildings from 2018 onwards? And then how do you remedy the buildings that have already been existing, especially those that have time memorial on them, 1802?
What we are doing is that we are encouraging the owners of such buildings to retrofit them to meet the standards. And those who come for renovation permits, we're also ensuring that before we issue those permits, such aspects must be catered for. But if you're a developer there and you have a building that has existed, this safety is not for the board, it's not for the regulators, it's not for engineer, it is not for me, it is for you first. Because if your building has any issues, it is you who is suffering first. So you must ensure that you retrofit your building to have these safety aspects for the safety of all of us and the other occupants of the buildings.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Rucukye, in ensuring that building fire safety and accessibility is for all Ugandans and it's for us, the end users, of course there's the challenge that many of the buildings that come up in the country, it's for personal benefit. But the benefit is from the end user, And so with all the other problems that they have to consider with, how are you as a board actually ensuring that you sustain the efforts that you are pushing forward in this sector for better development?
Thank you very much, Priscilla. You mentioned that that's for personal benefit, the house and the building. I want to suggest that when I actually come and visit you, then I have concerns about the safety of your house. So while, yes, the interest may be on public buildings or buildings which the public has access to, we want to encourage the public to also consider these fire safety provisions for their own residences. And like Herbert said, for you to get a building permit in Uganda, you must satisfy that actually the fire safety considerations have been made. So how do we sustain this? One, the standards and codes we talked about will outlive us as a reference point for how we can be fire safe. Two, we are moving with the pace at which the world is becoming digital. We've digitalized the building control process. At the moment, you're able to apply for a building permit, you're able to pay for that building permit or assessment of the plans, you're able to commit professionals who will supervise your construction, you're able to get an occupation permit, you're able to get your construction inspected online through a system which has been developed by a Ugandan team based at NBRB and NITA called BIMS, Building Industry Management System. Thirdly, we it's tempting for people to look at NBRB as a regulator, as a policing agency. And while, yes, we are mandated to promote and ensure safety, first and foremost, we want to work with the Ugandans. We want to work with the building committees, we want to work with the building control officers, we want to work with the developers. So we have a team that is training the building committees in these districts all over the country, working with them. We have a contact center that is reachable at all times. Our IT department, which is managing the BIM system, is available all the time, so that we work with the Ugandans, assure them that building safety affects all of us. So before we go into enforcement, to ensure that we are on board, and this is something which they should buy into.
Okay.
Maybe to add on, we're also doing sensitization and outreaches. I'll tell you, last year we were in Nebi, there's a school that caught fire, and our team went there and took the learners and the managers of the school through the drills and other fire safety aspects. So these are some of the things we are doing to ensure that we don't leave anyone behind. We move as the whole country and ensure, because safety is for all of us. Whether you're a developer, we're here in the building, from here you'll go in another building. So safety concerns all of us.
Yeah.
And as NBRB, it is core to our hearts to ensure that this sector is safe and good, even for investment.
Okay.
We have foreign investors who come in here. They should come and invest in a sector that is safe.
You have spoken of safety of buildings. There's a building that I was in once. The alarm went off. It's usually an indicator there's something wrong with the building, but people did not know where to exit from or which was the safe zone. Neither did they move or were moved by the alarm. So the mindset of Ugandans also generally ought to be dealt with in understanding that they must ensure their own safety and have consideration for it as they interact with buildings. But speaking of interaction, I know that Mr. Rucukye, in your investigative capacity, you've had keen interest in the number of fires we've been having in school premises. Yes. From your assessment, what have been the most common triggers of those fires, and how do they come back down to design?
Okay, thank you very much, Priscilla. Talking of statistics, according to the police crimes reports over the years, Uganda actually experiences 3 fires each day. There are over 1,000 fires reported to the police each year, and that has been consistent throughout. For the schools, the statistics show that we have about 1 fire in 3 days in our schools. And imagine our schools with the numbers we have in the schools, with the triple deckers and the spaces we are dealing with, the congestion. 1 fire in 3 days is way too high. So Ugandans should be worried about this. Our investigations we've done over the last 3 years as NBRB show that actually most fires in schools, unfortunately, are caused by arson. People are actually burning these schools. There are a few cases where there are electrical issues, short circuit, wiring which is being done by people who are not qualified, a few by maintenance works. I know fires can also be considered caused by environmental factors like lightning, but we haven't had a case like that. Majority are arson. So a few are electrical, and we have standards now. We are telling people and the schools that please, before you engage someone who says, I am an electrician, please ask him for a permit from Electricity Regulatory Authority. And I think the minimum is Class C. And that is something that you can ask someone, you're an electrician, where is the paper? But
there's also getting fake documents, and they can walk away with the fake documentation.
That's why we have the building industry management system, that all the documents can now be submitted online, and we have now processes that can detect the authenticity of these documents.
Okay. So actually what the BIMS does, the system I was talking about, is if you claim that Anthony Rucukye is a structural engineer, you put in Anthony's name, the system is connected to the register of Engineers Registration Board. So this BIMS will query the register of the engineers, and the ERB will return whether Anthony Rucukye actually exists on their register or not. If the name does not exist on the register of engineers, then the process, the application, will not proceed beyond that stage. So you have checks and balances there. So for schools, now that we know it is arson, what can we do? So we, as a board, are now aiming at the fire detection the fire suppression, the access to ensure that if we have these fires, police brigade can get in and fight these fires, and that the designs of these structures are to the extent that these pupils and students can safely evacuate these structures. They have fire assembly points where they can gather in terms of a fire, that you have water points or alternatives for the police department to use. In Priscilla, you will know that in Uganda, normally when you have fire being fought by police, many times you are saying police delayed to come, and when they came, they didn't have water. Strictly speaking, police fire trucks are supposed to move empty, because if it is full, it affects the speed at which it is going to access the site.
Oh,
so what we should be doing,
their water pumps.
We should have hydrants.
Hydrants.
So if there was a fire at Serena, God forbid, there should be a hydrant at Serena.
Oh, it's right outside.
So police should drive to Serena empty and pick the water from here.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
So
when we go down to the
issue.
Commercial zones, that does not exist.
So issues of access.
It goes back to then the structure set up from does that go back physical planning? That goes
so the
back
built
to
environment
authority.
must also be planned.
Okay.
So when we talk safety, we also have an aspect of planning.
Okay.
Can a fire truck get into Katanga, for example, to fight a fire? Can it access that area? So it's a wider issue that Ugandans would have to discuss.
Well, because it's a wider issue.
Maybe before you come in, from their investigations, we have also noted that some of these fires are even started by the learners themselves. What does this mean? It tells us that the parents must play their role. Please speak to your children. Some of them are misbehaving at school. Some of them are also misbehaving at home, and they move to schools and start causing these troubles. So it is also a societal problem and a moral issue that must be handled right from our home states. So the parents must also play a critical role in ensuring that their children are well behaved, home and at school, such that we reduce on these cases of fire that we are recording. In some schools, like the investigations have showed that some fires are started by the learners themselves. Okay,
let's go back to the hydrants. It's interesting because we don't see many of them, for example, in the city here in Kampala. So it begs the question, under whose responsibility or mandate does it fall to have those originally existing, so that it enables the the advocacy work that you're having?
Thank you, Priscilla. The hydrants, in terms of as a service or infrastructure, is the responsibility of Ministry of Works and Environment. Sorry, Ministry of Water and Environment. So what the other agencies would need to do, for example, someone needs to map them out and say, we have Kampala, this is the physical plan, and this is where the hydrants are. As police department, fire department, are they adequate or not? So it has to be a collaboration with different agencies to engage the Ministry of Water and Environment, under which National Water falls, Ministry of Works and Transport, because as a built environment, we have a say in that area, a bit of Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development, because the physical planners are in that area, the local agencies, which are the forefront of building control and even spatial planning, KCCA in the case of Kampala. So it has to be multi-sectoral. But it's a discussion that we must start having to ensure that at least as police struggles to get the fire trucks, the water hydrants are available, and most importantly, that the buildings are accessible.
Okay. You have shot my next question in the mouth, because I was going to ask, is that engagement already happening with the direct ministries that you have mentioned? But if it has not yet started happening, then we're a long way from ensuring that there's easy accessibility to the buildings, because that's one of the supplementaries to the access to the buildings in case of a fire.
Offhead, there's an engagement that has started, coordinated by the Office of the Prime Minister, not triggered by fire, but triggered by the earthquakes. After the recent earthquake in Turkey and Syria, His Excellency the President took keen interest and has requested the Office of the Prime Minister and other agencies to study that deeper, so that Uganda is better prepared or more resilient to certain events, to such events. So The Office of the Prime Minister has brought on board many agencies, including NBRB, Ministry of Works and Transport, Ministry of Water and Environment, National Water and Sewerage Corporation, Uganda Police, and the hydrant issue was one of the issues, because you know fires can also be caused by earthquakes. So those discussions have started. So we will see how those move, but we cannot afford to remain with the few hydrants we have. Is something that needs critical
for a growing
attention.
city that the authority is saying they're trying to make it a smart city, a growing population, and you know, so many things. The business sector is growing, so it's very, very paramount that that discussion is started as early as yesterday. But again, we do understand that the Ministry of Works and Transport is launching the Building Accessibility and Fire Safety Awards. Mr. Zziwa, could you tell us more about that?
Yes, thank you so much, Regina. With all the challenges we've talked about that are within the sector, there are also some individuals and organizations that are trying to ensure that we are fire safe and we have accessibility in the built environment. So it is now time to appreciate them, to reward excellence. That's why as a board working with UNAPID, we are coming up with the National Building Control Awards. And in these awards, we want to appreciate excellency and success of some individuals and organizations. And these awards are in 3 categories. We have the Public Building Award, public not in the sense of government structures, but public in the sense of access. And these are under this category, we have subcategories. We have the Health Institutions Award, where we're going to assess fire safety and accessibility of these health institutions. The public will have an opportunity. It is from the user experience. The public has an opportunity from tomorrow to 31st August to vote. 31st October, sorry, to vote for the buildings in all sectors, from the health sector, education. We have religious or faith-based institutions. We have the malls, the arcades, the shopping centers. They also have their category. We have now the civic, what you would call the public buildings. So that is one category. But we also have the Building Committee Award. As we've told you, under the Building Control Act, each city, municipality, and local government must have a building committee. So these building committees are responsible for building developments in their areas of operation. So we want to assess, we want to get feedback from the community, from the public, on how these building committees are operating. So there's also an award for that, for the best performing building committee. So wherever they exist, Ugandans will have an opportunity to assess them and give us feedback. We also have a 3rd category of the Building Control Officers Award. The Building Control Officer now works hand in hand with the building committee. They look into plans that are submitted to the building committee. So we also want to assess their performance. So this is an opportunity for Ugandans. We've been complaining about inaccessibility of some structures, especially by persons living with disabilities. We've been complaining about how unsafe our buildings are. It is now time for you as Ugandans to participate in this exercise by nominating, by voting those structures you think have tried to be accessible and be fire safe. So this exercise goes on from tomorrow. The link will be up on our website, the NBRB website, which is nbrb.go.ug. We have also created a special link for these awards, awards.nbrb.ug, where Ugandans can go and vote on all the categories of these awards. And we get the feedback from them. And the final event of awarding the best will be held on 8th December this year. And we hope that the minister and maybe other officials, government officials, will be part of this exercise, and also other stakeholders within our sector, so to ensure that this is a concerted effort. It's all of us that are supposed to streamline this sector.
So the public that would have contributed to the process will not be in the final award.
They will be invited. They'll be invited, yes.
Okay,
yes.
All right. So when you mentioned public engagement for aiding this whole process, are you talking about the general public, or are you talking about the professional end of you know, the building and construction industry?
Like I said, it's from the user experience.
Okay.
So the general public in general. Are you a builder? Are you just an ordinary Ugandan? You can access a building. Maybe you go downtown in the arcades for shopping. You could be doing your hair from the salon downtown. You have a right to go and assess how accessible this building is.
Okay.
If you're going to the last floor, how do you get there? Is there a lift? Do you use staircases? Are there ramps? Do we have designated parkings for persons living with disabilities? Do these buildings have fire extinguishers? Are they visible? We've talked about water hydrants. Are they there? So it is now the public to give us that information, because they are our eyes. We could be we're a board, we regulate this sector, we have offices in Kampala, we have building committees, but we do not go up to the last person. And it is the Ugandans who go to those last places. So they have now the opportunity to share with us this information. We do an assessment that is genuine, and we award the most deserving.
Okay. Now, while the award is a good thing, Mr. Rucukye, how is this awarding going to help other Ugandans comply and adhere to fire safety?
Thank you very much. Priscilla, generally human beings love heroes. So while we can sit here and say the systems are not working, or there's a lot of mess in the built environment, and could be true, there are some individuals who are actually complying with the law, and want to recognize them. Want to recognize them and also use that opportunity to show the public that you can actually be like so-and-so, who is compliant, and the reason why he's compliant is because he's interested in your safety. So we hope Ugandans will actually come on board and give us nominations from the 11 cities, from the 31 municipalities, from the 135 districts all over the country. There will be, after the nominations or the voting by the public, we have a panel of experts who understand building control, who will now select from those buildings, the structures you'll have nominated, and pick out for us the best in the cities, the best in the municipalities, the best in the districts, and the profile will show why they've been chosen to be the best. And hopefully, when Ugandans see that there is someone who is able to do it at this cost, and it is safer than my structure, maybe they will be inspired to want to be like them.
Okay, all right. In all of this, while we're still looking at fire safety and accessibility, what has been the engagement between the professionals, especially from all the way from inception of design, architects, engineers, and so on and so forth? What has been the engagement, and how do you measure their consideration of such things when they're doing their side of the work?
Okay, thank you, Priscilla. Now, the Building Control Act 2013 and the regulations which now operationalize the Act 2020 actually place the construction industry in the hands of the professionals. So if I am constructing an apartment and I have an engineer in charge, if anything goes wrong, the law looks for the professional. Okay. And the professionals are being engaged by us to ensure they understand the legal framework and to ensure that they are on board. On the board, National Building Review Board, the governing board, we have representatives from the Architects Registration Board, which is the body that regulates architects in Uganda. We have a member from the ERB, Engineers Registration Board, which regulates the engineering profession in Uganda. And we have a member from the Surveyors Registration Board, SRB, which regulates surveyors. And that's the reason why they are there. We also have a representative from the physical planners. And we're engaging them. On a quarterly basis, we have an intention as NBRB to engage them, give them feedback of what we are finding in industry, to ensure they also understand the challenges, and they help us to make the built environment safer.
Mr. Zziwa, while that's a good initiative, at the end of the day also we must put in line what we call bare minimum. If you don't do this, or if you don't comply this way, there's a penalty. So what are the existing penalties for non-compliance?
Okay, we should also admit that there are masqueraders in the sector. There are those who purport to be professionals, yet they are not. But for those professionals, we are working hand in hand with the professional bodies to ensure that if you're a professional and you do not do what you're supposed to do, there's disciplinary action. One, you can be deregistered, your practicing certificate can be withdrawn. Those are some of the measures we are taking to ensure that even these professionals are liable in case of any challenges. But also encourage them to avoid having many sites. Sometimes you find one professional supervising 10 sites. One is in Jinja, another is in Kampala, another one is in Gulu. Surely speaking, you can't manage all this. So we want to ensure that they professionally practice. With all the limitations that are in the sector, we should ensure that the few professionals we have, they are different from the masqueraders who call themselves fundis and engineers in the sector. So the professionals must live as an example, must give a good picture to the sector that what they are doing is prescribed within the Building Control Act, the regulations, the standards and the codes.
Okay, all right. In closing, Mr. Rucukye, what's your call to action to ensure that as far as buildings are concerned, that's both public and residency, they do adhere to fire safety and accessibility?
Thank you, Priscilla. Ugandans, accessibility issues should not be remote from us who are not living with disabilities, because at any one time we are candidates for disability. My father is 80 years, my mother is 78. If they had built a storied house and they were staying upstairs, they would not be able to move up to their bedroom at this point. So even when it's your private residence, is it accessible to people that may have disabilities? That's a challenge to all of us. Fire safety, if you enter a building, I've told you that police gets 3 incidents of fires each day. If I'm entering Serena today, where is the fire assembly point? Are there fire extinguishers? How fire safe am I? So before you rent that shop, in that arcade, before you go to that church, before you go to that market, ask yourself, how fire safe is this? For people who are renting premises, occupation permits are now a legal requirement. And you cannot get an occupation permit if the fire safety considerations have not been signed off or ticked off by the police department as part of the building committee. So Ugandans, don't fear to ask these questions, because your safety matters to this nation.
Okay, and that is Mr. Rucukye Anthony, who is the Manager Investigations with the National Building Review Board. We've also had this conversation in line with the Communications Manager, Mr. Herbert Zziwa, and I hope that that has given you something to think about as you go about your business today and interact with buildings, both on a residence level and a public level. Have that at the back of your mind, that you could be a candidate of disability because of something that could happen in tandem because of ignorance in one way or another. That brings us to the end of this conversation. We do take a breather. We return shortly with more conversations.
You're watching Morning at NTV.